Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Mirror Dungeon solo video. It's been a few months since my last one, and a lot has happened since then, but long story short, my computer exploded on me, and I didn't really feel like making videos for quite a while afterwards. Anyways, completely overlooking my long absence, we've got a brand new identity that just released, Devyat Rodion. She's a very powerful identity, both on her own and when supporting the Rupture team, with her playstyle revolving entirely around her own unique status effect of the Courier Trunk, which essentially ranges from 0 to 30 and grants her very powerful buffs as the number increases. However, once she does reach 30, she will start taking a significant amount of damage every single time she uses a skill or if the turn ends. This makes her the only identity in the game that is literally on a timer for how long you can use her for. And at first glance, one might think that she is a terrible solo identity as a result, but this is not actually the case. In fact, I would go as far to say she is one of the best solo identities for three very specific reasons. The first is her Courier Trunk, which provides upwards of 80% bonus damage on her skill 2 and 3, once she reaches a 20 stack, which is more than enough for her to one-shot most enemies that are not resistant to slash damage. The second is her passive, which provides her free shielding simply by being fast or having haste, which combined with the third aspect is not particularly difficult to accomplish. Speaking of, the final thing that makes her a good solo identity is the fact that she is a Rupturer identity, and synergizes well with Rupture gifts. And if you know anything about those, they provide lots of haste and lots of damage up. All of these combine to create an identity who is both absurdly fast and hits incredibly hard. She's not just a courier, she's an entire goddamn freight train. Despite this though, she is not without flaws, which are very apparent. The first is that her counter is completely useless once she reaches 15 Courier Trunk, because it triggers her retreat, and if she retreats while being the only identity on the field, you just insta-lose the fight. It can be funny, but it ultimately means that she cannot stall whatsoever in order to heal. Speaking of stalling, the second flaw is, like I mentioned before, her time limit. In the best case scenario, she can survive around 5 to 6 turns before her package starts hurting her. After that, she has about 1 to 2 extra turns before you inevitably lose. This means that there are certain fights that are literally impossible for her. Basically, anything with more than 2 waves of enemies, as 12 of them is about her limit. Moving on to the run itself, we start with all 3 Rupture gifts and pick the Outcast for our first floor. The boss we got is the only one that could possibly prove to be a threat, the Doomsday Calendar. I say that not because he could actually kill us, but because of how scripted his fight is, it's guaranteed to take a minimum of 4 turns. The best way to play Rodion and maximize the amount of time she can stay on the field is to exclusively use skill 1s up until you reach 15 Courier Trunk, as at that point skill 2s will become just as efficient as skill 1s. Technically speaking, using exclusively skill 3s would maximize your amount of time, but that would require replacing your skills, and that mechanic is currently broken at the time of recording. Doomsday Calendar isn't as threatening as I initially thought he would be, as once we reach a 15 stack our DPS skyrockets, and we basically insta-kill him. We take the Ebony Brooch for our reward, and take Nebulizer as well, because might as well turn her into a poise identity while we're at it. Our next floor we pick is Hell's Chicken, as I wanted to pick up the Rupture Chicken gift, but we end up finding something even better. But before that, we pick up Resolution, Lithograph, and Ragged Umbrella before finding one of the best ego gifts you can have for a fast identity, the Tango Marinade. With that, we make it to Papa Bongy, ready to pick up some fried chicken for delivery. This fight isn't that bad. It can be a little scary with us being blunt weak, but so long as we focus down the Papa, the chickens are basically useless and don't do any real damage, especially with our free shield.
끌지 말고 완벽한 한 방. 시원한걸?
이렇게 망설임 없어.
길 좀 막지 마. 길에서 비켜.
대체로 큰 피해를 준 것 같아.
시간 끌지 말고.
완벽한 공격이었어.
제법 좋은 일격. 저런 실력 있는 대결
길에서
도시에
비켜.
많아져야 할
승객이
텐데
딱
말이야.
한 방 먹였어.
곧 노래
시간 끌지 말고. 길에서 비켜.
대성공이야. 가령 신나. 노래 부를까?
We take Carmilla for our reward and head into Piercers and Penetrators for the 3rd floor, where we fuse Standard Duty Battery and randomly find Imposed Weight, the goat of ego gifts. The boss for this floor is the Drenched Gossypium, who is definitely a scary boss because Bleed is a terrifying status effect for solos. Just like any other Bleed fight, the boss's main gimmick doesn't actually matter. What does is the bleed stack and trying to minimize it as much as possible. For the Gossypium, he has 2 different attacks that you need to worry about. One that does 3 bleed and 1 count, and another that does 4 bleed and 2 count, but only does the 4 if it is a heads roll. Technically speaking, clashing with the 4 one is the better option, but if you like to test your luck like me, you can let them go through, as they can be better if they just roll tails. Being an entirely slash-oriented identity means we only have to worry about this for the first 2 turns, as with our absurd damage output and the Gossypium being fatal to slash, means we easily stagger it on the 3rd turn and finish it off on the next.
그걸
단편님,
길 좀 막지 마.
힘 좀 써줘.
완벽한 한 방. 시원한걸? 길에서 비켜.
힘들어. 부위가 조각났어. 계속해도 돼.
We receive Cigarette Holder for our reward and head into the Evil Defining for the 4th floor, where we pick up Eclipse of Scarlet Moths as well as all of the Tier 1 Rupture gifts, and the Material Interference Shield. Unfortunately for this floor, we get forced into an elite encounter against the Pequod crew, which would be an impossible task for us if not for the fact that we are Pierce resistant. Literally though, the only way out of this fight is to just end up getting lucky and just hope they all use their 1 or 2 coin skills, or just have poor rolls in general. We're not lacking for damage, but neither are they, and it makes them the 2nd hardest fight in the run, but just by being incredibly RNG.
시간 끌지 말고. 길에서 비켜. 시간 끌지 말고. 길에서 비켜.
칼날이 잘 드네요. 아마 그 공격이 약점이었겠죠?
나이스! 하나 잡혔다. 시간 끌지 말고. 길에서 비켜.
내 배가 배고파했어. 잘됐다.
길 좀 막지 마.
지?
시간 끌지 말고. 길에서 비켜. 길에서 비켜.
방금 공격. 다음에 다른 개체에게도 다시 해봐줄게.
We fuse Deathseeker before heading into the fight against everyone's favorite old hag, Captain Ahab. Hard fight? Absolutely not. The hardest thing about this fight is that it's a 3-phase fight, which means we have to deplete her health bar 3 times, and let's just say that the actual boss is very impatient and quite rectangular. This fight is the only one that got even remotely close to the maxed out 30 stack, getting all the way up to a 29, but 5 turns is all we need to take out 3000 HP.
힘좀 써줘.
시간 끌지 말고.
승객이 딱콩 한 방 먹였어.
길 좀 막지 마. 말고 뭐 하려는 거지? 길 좀 막지 마. 시간 끌지 말고.
방금 공격 다음 스트레이트에게도 다시 해볼래? 영상을 만들면 우리 도움이 될지 몰라. 땀이 빨리고 있어.
길 좀 막지 마. 시간 끌지 말고. 길을 비켜.
We decide to take the hag's leg as a souvenir and find illusory hunt before heading into inert sloth for the final floor. Nothing really happens here, so we move on to the final boss against the dream-devouring slit current. An actual boss, and one that certainly gives us a run for our money. The reason he's such a problem is, 1. His blind obsession skill does Sinking Deluge, which can and will kill us if we let it go through. The second problem is that he has a lot of blunt skills, and thus just does a lot of damage in general. The final problem is the skill check that appears after the second turn. If you fail it, it does 20 damage, which coupled with how much damage we're already taking, is enough to stagger us 90% of the time. On top of that, with how we're constantly taking sanity damage, it's not the most consistent thing to pass. Blind Obsession is not that big of a deal, even with the paralysis, as even a skill 2 is more than enough to beat it most of the time, with how high our clash power is. The problem is the second Blind Obsession on the third turn, which more often than not, we end up staggered when it happens. We could target the flotsam to disable it, but with how much sanity damage we take, it would result in us getting panicked and losing the next turn. I kept trying over and over, trying to just get lucky enough to pass the skill check, but never did, no matter how hard I tried. Eventually, I decided to stop being an idiot and actually reduce the amount of damage I was taking by clashing with one of the blunt skills instead of the one that was applying a ton of sinking. Doing this instantly worked, as I now had enough HP in order to tank the skill check, but wouldn't you know it, the second I don't need it anymore, I pass it. With that, the rest of the fight is pretty easy. Actually having skill slots to clash with makes the game a lot easier. Who knew?
여유로웠어. 아예 여기서 밥 좀 먹다가 출발해도 될 것 같은데. 다들 식량 꺼내.
And that's how I soloed Mirror Dungeon hard with Devyat Rodion. He is incredibly powerful, and honestly being a good Rupture identity is just the cherry on top. I'd say as long as you aren't picking really long fights, she is one of the best identities in the game in terms of sheer DPS. And even if you do pick a long fight, she's got the retreat mechanic built in, which lets her still be usable in those, as long as you aren't soloing with her. Anyways, I'm back now and going to try to upload much more consistently than I used to, so look forward to the next installment of this series. Goodbye!